She looked me straight in the eye and said, "No one will believe you." The words were like a slap across the face, sudden, stinging, and unforgettable. I remember standing there, frozen, trying to understand how someone I trusted could turn so cold. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something about the way she said it, like a final warning or an unbreakable promise. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September, the air just starting to lose its summer warmth. I'd stopped by her office to drop off some paperwork, mundane things like invoices and budget approvals. I didn't expect to be ambushed, but that's what it felt like, an ambush. She shut the door softly behind me, her hand lingering on the knob as she turned to face me. "I need you to listen carefully," she said, and something in her tone made the hairs on my neck stand up. My hands tightened around the folder I was holding. I tried to smile, tried to make light of it, but her eyes didn't match her calm expression. There was a glint there, something dark and calculating. Listen to what I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though my heart was starting to pound. She stepped closer, so close I could see the tiny flecks of green in her brown eyes. "No one will believe you," she repeated. "If you try to tell anyone what you think you know, if you so much as whisper a word, no one will take your side." I wanted to laugh it off, to pretend she was joking, but the certainty in her voice made it impossible. I felt my mouth go dry, my throat tightening as I struggled to swallow. "Why would you say something like that?" I managed to croak out. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned back slightly, tilting her head as if she were sizing me up, calculating how much damage I could do and how to stop me from doing it. In that moment, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something dangerous and deep, a place I hadn't even known existed. I left her office in a daze, my mind reeling with questions. What did she think I knew? Why would she be so sure no one would believe me? I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a misunderstanding, but the words echoed in my head like a threat. "No one will believe you." I walked back to my car, my hands trembling, as I fumbled with the keys. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, my mind a storm of confusion and fear. She was someone I'd trusted for years, a friend, a mentor even. We'd shared coffee breaks and quiet conversations about our lives outside of work. I never imagined she'd turn on me like this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much sense it made. Little things I'd brushed aside suddenly clicked into place, the way she always seemed to know what people were saying, how she always had an answer ready before I'd even finished asking the question. The way she'd cut people off mid-sentence, shutting down their doubts with a smile. I thought back to a few weeks earlier, when I'd mentioned some inconsistencies I'd noticed in the budget reports. She'd laughed it off, told me not to worry. But now I wondered if that laughter had been a smokescreen. If maybe, just maybe, she'd been hiding something all along. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying her words over and over. "No one will believe you." It wasn't just a threat, it was a challenge. She was daring me to try, daring me to stand up and speak out, knowing that if I did, I'd be met with nothing but disbelief and ridicule. The next morning, I woke up with a knot of determination in my chest. I wouldn't let her win. I couldn't. But I also knew I couldn't go at this blindly. If I was going to prove that she was lying, I needed evidence, real solid evidence, that couldn't be brushed aside with a few smooth words. So, I started to pay attention. Every conversation, every glance, every offhand remark, I took mental notes, even if it seemed insignificant. I began to see the patterns, the careful ways she manipulated the truth to suit her needs. I noticed how she played people against each other, always staying just out of reach of blame. I also noticed how alone I felt. I wanted to talk to someone, anyone, about what was happening, but the memory of her words kept my lips sealed. "No one will believe you." The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much power those words carried. If I told someone and they didn't believe me, it would be worse than saying nothing at all. It would prove she was right. Still, I couldn't ignore the way my gut twisted every time she smiled at me, the way her laughter now sounded like nails on a chalkboard. I couldn't pretend everything was fine when I knew deep down that something was very wrong. One evening, after another day of forced smiles and careful conversations, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face looked pale and drawn, the dark circles under my eyes like bruises. I splashed cold water on my cheeks and stared at myself, really stared for the first time in weeks. I know what I saw, I whispered to my reflection. My voice was steady, even though my hands were shaking. And I'm not going to let her silence me. It felt like a small act of rebellion, but it was enough to light a spark inside me. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know how I was going to prove what I knew. But I was done pretending. I was done letting her words hold me prisoner. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the bathroom, feeling the weight of her threat still heavy on my shoulders. But there was something else there too, something stronger. The belief that no matter how many people she fooled, no matter how many lies she told, I wouldn't let her erase my truth. I didn't know what the next day would bring. I didn't know if I'd find the evidence I needed, or if I'd be forced to watch as she twisted everything around on me. But as I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, I made myself a promise I would find a way to make them believe. The next day, I watched her closely. Every word she spoke, every glance she gave my mind, cataloged it all like pieces of a puzzle. She moved through the office with that same calm confidence, her laughter ringing through the halls as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had shifted. Her threat had cracked the surface of the life I thought I knew. At first, I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But the more I replayed her words, the more I realized there was no other way to take them. She was warning me plain and simple, stay silent. No one will believe you. I started to notice the way she talked to people, how she wove herself into every conversation like she belonged there, like she had the right to know every secret and every fear. She was always just one step ahead, finishing other people's sentences, anticipating their questions, smiling at just the right moment to make them feel seen and heard. But I also saw the way she twisted things. A half-truth here, a convenient omission there. She had a way of making people doubt themselves, of turning the smallest mistakes into proof of their incompetence. And all the while, she stayed untouchable, her reputation spotless. It scared me how good she was at it. How easily she could make people doubt their own memories, their own instincts. I wondered how many others she'd already silenced without them even realizing it. One afternoon, I watched her corner a coworker, Lena, a quiet woman who always kept her head down and did her work without complaint. Lena was holding a stack of folders, her fingers white-knuckled around the edges. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere else but there. I'm just saying, the woman said, her voice low and persuasive. It would be easier for everyone if you kept this to yourself. No need to make things messy. Lena nodded slowly, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear I'd felt. I wanted to step in to tell Lena she wasn't alone, but the words caught in my throat. If I spoke up now, I'd be exposing myself. I'd be handing her the very thing she wanted, proof that I was willing to talk. So I stayed silent, and the guilt burned like acid in my chest. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Lena, about how many others there might be, all of us bound together by a woman who knew how to turn our fears against us. I thought about the way she'd smiled at me after delivering her threat, like she knew I'd keep my mouth shut, like she'd already won. But I refused to let her be right. The next morning, I started a folder on my computer. I labeled it Truth. Inside, I began to compile everything I noticed, little inconsistencies, casual lies, small moments of manipulation. I saved emails, took screenshots of text messages, and wrote down everything I remembered about that day in her office. At first, it felt like nothing, like I was grasping at shadows. But as the days passed, the pieces began to add up. I saw how she used small favors to buy people's loyalty, how she turned coworkers against each other with rumors and half-truths. She was so careful, so deliberate. It was like watching a spider weave a web around all of us, sticky and invisible. And I was determined to find a way to cut myself free. But the deeper I looked, the more I realized how isolated I'd become. Every time I considered confiding in someone, her words came back to me. No one will believe you. And the worst part was, she was probably right. She'd spent years cultivating her image, charming, dependable, always ready to lend a hand. If I came forward without proof, I'd be dismissed as jealous, paranoid, or worse. I thought about the few friends I had at work, people I'd laughed with, over coffee, shared lunches with in the break room. How would they look at me if I told them what I suspected? Would they see the same manipulator I did? Or would they see someone who'd lost touch with reality? The fear of that rejection was almost enough to keep me quiet. Almost. One afternoon, I caught her watching me. I was at the printer waiting for a report to finish when I felt her gaze on the back of my neck. I turned slowly, and there she was smiling, that same calm smile, her head tilted ever so slightly, as if she were amused by some private joke. "Everything all right?" she asked, her tone light and friendly. But I heard the question behind the question, the unspoken warning. I forced a smile, my heart hammering in my chest. "Everything's fine," I said, and the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. As she walked away, I realized she was testing me, watching to see if I'd crack. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I would keep my secrets close, keep building my case piece by piece until I was ready. Because I knew now that this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone she'd ever cornered in a quiet hallway, everyone she'd ever silenced with a well-placed lie. And I couldn't let her keep winning. That night, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my notes, the file I'd started with trembling hands, but now clutched like a lifeline. It wasn't much, but it was growing. A little bit of truth hidden away like a seed waiting to sprout. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether I'd find the proof I needed, or whether she'd see through me first. But I wasn't backing down. I was done being afraid. I was done letting her words decide who I was. She might have thought no one would believe me, but I was going to find a way to make sure they did. And that thought, that tiny spark of hope, was enough to keep me going. By the end of the week, I had enough fragments of truth to convince myself I wasn't crazy. I kept adding to the truth folder every conversation, every suspicious glance, every note that felt off. It was all there, growing into something I could no longer ignore. I knew I couldn't keep it all to myself forever. I needed someone to see it, to help me sort through the mess, and tell me I wasn't imagining things. Someone who would believe me, even if no one else did. I thought I'd found that person in Maya. Maya and I had started at the company around the same time, and we'd bonded over those early days of shared uncertainty and whispered jokes in the break room. She was sharp, empathetic, the kind of friend who would notice if your smile didn't quite reach your eyes. I trusted her more than anyone else in that building. One evening after work, I pulled her aside in the parking lot, the sun dipping low in the sky, and casting everything in a warm, forgiving light. "Maya," I said, my voice low, my hands trembling just enough to give me away. "I need to tell you something, something important." She raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told her about the woman's threat, how she'd looked me in the eye and said no one would believe me, how I'd started gathering proof because I couldn't let it go. I showed her some of the emails I'd saved, the notes I'd been keeping. At first, Maya listened in silence, her expression serious and focused. I watched her eyes flick over the words on my phone screen, watched her mouth tighten as she read the carefully chosen phrases I'd flagged. I felt hope rising in my chest, fragile and bright. But when she looked back up at me, her expression was hesitant. I don't know, Eliza," she said softly. "This is a lot. Are you sure you're not reading too much into it?" My stomach twisted. "You think I'm overreacting," she bit her lip. "It's not that I don't trust you, but she's been here for years. She's respected. People like her. If you're wrong," I felt the words like a slap. If I'm wrong. It was the same as saying she didn't believe me. She told me no one would believe me. I whispered, my voice shaking. "And now, you're proving her right." Maya looked pained, like she wanted to take the words back, but didn't know how. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she said finally. "Maybe you should let it go. For your own sake, let it go." The idea was like a bitter taste on my tongue. How could I let it go when I saw the truth? Every time she smiled at me, I turned away from Maya, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought I'd found an ally, someone to stand with me in the shadows. Instead, I felt more alone than ever. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the glow of my phone on the nightstand. I thought about everything Maya had said about the doubt in her voice. It was exactly what the woman had promised me. No one will believe you. I wanted to scream, to shake her shoulders, and make her see what I saw. But I knew that wouldn't help. If I pushed too hard, I'd only look more desperate, more unstable. And that was exactly what she wanted. So I made a decision. I wouldn't stop searching, but I wouldn't trust anyone else with what I knew. Not yet. This was my burden, to carry my battle, to fight. If no one else would stand with me, I would stand alone. The next morning, I forced a smile as I walked into the office. Maya was already there, her eyes darting up to mine before quickly looking away. I could see the guilt in her expression, the way she twisted her hands together when she thought no one was watching. She wouldn't betray me, I told myself. Not really. She was just scared. I couldn't blame her for that. Fear had a way of twisting even the strongest friendships, but I also knew something else. Fear was exactly what the woman wanted. She wanted me isolated, doubting myself, second-guessing everything I thought I knew. And for a moment, she'd succeeded. But only for a moment. I doubled down on my efforts. I watched her more carefully than ever, noting every inconsistency, every slip of the mask. I recorded conversations when I could saved every scrap of evidence that came my way. I didn't know what it would take to prove the truth, but I knew I was getting closer. One afternoon, I caught her in a lie so small, so subtle, I almost missed it. She was talking to one of the senior managers about a budget discrepancy. A small thing, a rounding error, she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. But I'd seen the numbers myself, and I knew she was lying. I watched her smile, watched the manager nod along, completely convinced. And I realized then just how deep her web went. She didn't need to shout or threaten to get her way. All she had to do was speak with that calm, confident tone, and people would believe anything she said. That was her power, and that was what I had to fight. That evening, I sat in my car in the dark parking lot, my phone glowing in my hand, as I scrolled through the evidence I'd collected. It still didn't feel like enough, like a single thread trying to hold back a storm. But it was something, and I was done letting her words decide what I did or didn't do. I would find a way to expose her lies. I would find a way to make them believe me. I didn't know how long it would take, or how many times I'd have to stand up and be told I was wrong, but I wasn't going to stop. I was done waiting for someone else to fight for me. This was my truth, my battle, and I was ready. After Maya's hesitation, I realized that words alone wouldn't be enough. If I wanted people to see the truth, I needed more than notes and half-remembered conversations. I needed evidence that couldn't be ignored. The kind of proof that would force people to listen even if they didn't want to. That's when I started recording her. It felt dangerous, thrilling, and more than a little terrifying. My hands would shake as I opened the voice memo app on my phone and tucked it into my pocket, the red dot blinking like a silent promise. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, I was protecting myself. But every time I pressed record, I felt a flicker of fear that she would find out. The first time my heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give me away. We were in the hallway by the conference rooms, a place that always seemed to echo with quiet secrets. She was talking to a coworker, Brad, someone who always tried to stay out of office politics. I watched her smile at him, the kind of smile that looked warm on the surface, but felt cold underneath. "I just think it's better if we keep this between us," she said, her tone so gentle, so reasonable. "No need to get other people involved?" Brad nodded uncertainly, clearly torn. I watched the flicker of doubt cross his face, and I knew he was feeling the same fear I had, the same uncertainty. But in the end, he just nodded again and walked away. I slipped out of the hallway, my phone still recording in my pocket. My hands were shaking, but I felt a surge of triumph. I had it. Proof of the way she manipulated people, the way she silenced them with her carefully chosen words. That night, I listened to the recording over and over, memorizing every inflection in her voice. It wasn't much, just a snippet of conversation, but it was real, tangible, and it gave me the courage to keep going. I started carrying my phone everywhere, always ready to press record, if she so much as looked at me. Some days it felt like I was living two lives: the polite, smiling woman who showed up to work every day, and the secret detective cataloging every lie and half truth. The more I listened, the more I realized how good she was at making people doubt themselves. She never outright threatened anyone she didn't have to. She used kindness like a weapon, twisting it around people's necks until they didn't even realize they were being strangled. One afternoon, I caught her in the break room with Lena again. I ducked into the hallway just in time to hear her say, "You don't want to be the reason everything falls apart, do you?" Her voice was soft, almost sad, but the threat was there, coiled tight like a snake. I pressed record and held my breath. When she left, I slipped into the break room and found Lena staring at the floor, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself disappear. I wanted to reach out to tell her she wasn't alone, but I knew it was too soon. If I moved too fast, she'd just pull away. So I waited. I watched. I kept recording. Some nights, I'd lie in bed with my phone next to me, listening to her voice over and over. It was like peeling back layers of paint, each recording revealing more of the rot underneath. And the more I heard, the more certain I became that I was doing the right thing. But the fear never went away. Every time I saw her, I wondered if she knew, if she could see the truth in my eyes. She was so good at reading people, I had no doubt she was watching me too, looking for any sign of weakness. And I knew that if she ever found out what I was doing, she'd find a way to destroy me. One morning, I was standing by the copy machine when she came up behind me. I felt her hand on my shoulder, light and casual, but my whole body went rigid. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice warm and friendly. Too friendly. "Fine," I said quickly, forcing a smile as I turned to face her. My heart was pounding so hard, I could barely hear my own voice. She studied me for a moment, her head tilted just slightly. "You seem a little tense lately. Is there something you want to tell me?" I swallowed hard. "No, nothing." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Good. I'd hate for there to be misunderstandings." She let her hand drop and walked away, leaving me standing there with my pulse racing. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the papers I was holding. She knew, or at least she suspected, and that terrified me. But it also made me more determined. That night, I listened to the recordings again, telling myself that if I could just hold on a little longer, I'd have enough. Enough to prove to everyone what she really was. Enough to finally break free of her web. I didn't know how long it would take, or how many more nights I'd spend staring at my ceiling, too afraid to sleep. But I wasn't backing down. She might have been watching me, but I was watching her too. And I was getting closer. The recordings were my lifeline, each one a fragile thread holding me steady. I listened to them every night, not just to hear her voice, but to remind myself I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't imagined the way she twisted words turned trust into a weapon. It was in those late-night hours, headphones pressed tight against my ears, that I started to see the cracks in her armor. One afternoon, I was sitting at my desk when I overheard her talking to one of the junior analysts, Mark. He was young, eager to please, the kind of person who would do anything for a pat on the back. She knew exactly how to play him. "I just need you to tweak these numbers," she said, her voice low and smooth. "It's nothing major, just a little adjustment to make sure the report looks consistent." Mark hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. "Are you sure that's okay?" She smiled, that perfect, reassuring smile. "Of course. It's just a formality." I pressed record, my hand trembling, as I slid my phone onto the desk. When she walked away, Mark looked like he'd seen a ghost. I wanted to grab him, tell him he wasn't alone, that I knew exactly how she made you feel, like you didn't have a choice. But I stayed quiet. For now, I added the new recording to the folder, labeling it carefully. Each file was another step closer to the truth, another crack in the mask she wore so well. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep her lies went. She didn't just manipulate people, she created entire stories, weaving them together so seamlessly that it was almost impossible to separate fact from fiction. She'd built her own little kingdom, and she ruled it with a velvet fist. I started to notice how she used people like chess pieces, moving them around the board to suit her needs. One day she'd flatter someone, the next, she'd plant a seed of doubt in their mind, just enough to keep them off balance. I saw it in the way she spoke to Lena, always with that edge of concern that was really just another form of control. In the way she charmed the managers, turning their trust into a shield against anyone who might question her. It was horrifying to watch, but also oddly fascinating. Like studying a predator in the wild, seeing how it moved, how it chose its prey. But even predators have weaknesses. Late one night, I stayed behind at the office, the building quiet and echoing with the sound of my footsteps. I'd told myself I was just staying to finish a report, but the truth was, I was hoping to catch her off guard. She didn't know I was there. She didn't know I was watching. I saw her slip into the conference room, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was soft, almost affectionate, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach twist. "No, I told you it's handled," she said, her tone dismissive. "He's too naive to question it. And if he does, well, you know what to do." I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but her words were enough to make my blood run cold. She was orchestrating something, pulling strings I hadn't even seen. When she hung up, she stood there for a moment, her shoulders tense. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something: uncertainty, maybe even fear. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual calm mask. But it was there. I held my breath, my heart pounding. She wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. She was human. And that gave me hope. The next morning, I watched her from across the office, studying the way she moved. She was as smooth as ever, all warm smiles and gentle reassurances. But now I saw the tiny hesitations, the way her eyes flicked over people, like she was constantly assessing the threat they posed. I realized then that she was afraid too. Afraid of losing control. Afraid that the lies she'd built her world on might start to crumble. And I was going to make sure they did. One by one, I started reaching out to the people she'd hurt. Carefully, quietly. I didn't tell them everything I couldn't, not yet, but I let them know they weren't alone. I shared the smallest pieces of what I'd found, just enough to plant the seed of doubt. Lena was the first to listen. "I thought it was just me," she whispered one afternoon, her voice shaking. "I thought I was overreacting." "You're not," I said, my own voice firm for the first time in weeks. "She does this to everyone. But we don't have to let her keep doing it." Lena nodded slowly, and in her eyes I saw the first spark of something: anger maybe, or the faintest glimmer of hope. I knew it wouldn't be easy. She still had power, and she still had the trust of people who didn't want to see what was really happening. But I wasn't the same scared woman I'd been when she first whispered those words to me. I was stronger now. I had the truth, and I had the determination to see it through. I didn't know what the next step was or how I was going to bring her down. But I knew one thing for certain: she was starting to crack, and I was going to be there when it all fell apart. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every smile she offered, every word she spoke, felt like a test I had to pass. She moved through the office with that same quiet authority, but I could feel the tension growing beneath the surface. I knew she suspected me. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered a little too long when she caught me watching her. In the way she paused in the middle of a sentence, like she was weighing every word before it left her lips. But I didn't let it stop me. I kept gathering evidence, piece by piece. Each file in my folder felt like a small victory, a tiny act of defiance against the hold she had over everyone. I was still scared, but the fear was different now. It didn't paralyze me, it drove me forward. I started to see that I wasn't the only one who'd begun to notice the cracks in her perfect facade. Whispers started to circulate in the office, small, hesitant rumors that spoke of inconsistencies and half-truths. People were still too afraid to say it out loud, but I could see it in their eyes, the beginning of doubt. One afternoon, I found myself in the break room, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Lena slipped in beside me, her expression guarded but determined. "I've been thinking about what you said," she murmured, glancing over her shoulder to make sure we were alone. "About her. About the way she manipulates things." I nodded slowly, careful not to push too hard, and Lena took a deep breath. I've seen it too. Little things, things I didn't want to believe at first. But now, I don't know. I think you're right. Her words were like a lifeline. I reached out and squeezed her hand, a silent promise that we weren't in this alone. For the first time, I felt like the tide was starting to turn, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I knew that if I wanted to bring her down, I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be twisted or explained away. So I kept recording, kept watching, even as the weight of it all threatened to crush me. Late one night, I sat in my apartment, the glow of my computer screen illuminating the darkness. I played the recordings over and over, listening for anything I might have missed. My heart raced with every word, every carefully chosen phrase. And then I heard it. It was a conversation she'd had with one of the senior managers, a man named Daniel, who everyone trusted implicitly. She was calm as always, but there was a sharpness to her voice that sent chills down my spine. I need you to sign off on this report, she said, her tone low and urgent. No questions, Daniel. If you do this for me, I promise I'll make sure you're protected. Daniel hesitated. But these numbers don't add up. If someone looks too closely, no one will, she interrupted, her voice as smooth as silk. And if they do, it won't be your name on the line. It'll be hers. Hers. She was talking about me. My breath caught in my throat. She was setting me up, preparing to shift the blame if her lies ever came to light. And Daniel? He didn't argue. He just sighed and agreed. I sat there, my hands trembling, as I saved the recording. This was it. The proof I'd been searching for. The turning point. The next morning, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities, with plans and fears that wouldn't quiet. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. If I didn't act now, she'd tighten her grip until there was no way out. I cornered Daniel in the hallway, my voice steady even as my heart thundered in my chest. I know what she asked you to do, I said quietly. I heard everything. Daniel's eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, cutting him off. She's using you to protect herself. And if you keep letting her, you'll go down with her. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I'd felt for so long. But beneath it, there was something else, regret. What do you want from me? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to help me, I said. I can't do this alone. But if we work together, we can stop her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded, a slow, resigned motion. Okay, I'll help you. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. And it was enough to give me hope. Together, we started to build our case. I shared the recordings, the notes I'd taken, the countless hours I'd spent piecing together the truth. Daniel brought his own knowledge documents, she'd hidden conversations he'd been a part of, but never questioned until now. It felt like we were assembling a bomb, each piece another fuse, ready to blow her world apart. But I knew we had to be careful. She was still watching, still searching for any sign that her empire was about to collapse. One wrong move, and she'd bury us both. So we planned in secret, our conversations hushed and careful. We mapped out every step, every word, until we were sure we had enough to expose her. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone she'd ever silenced, everyone who'd ever doubted themselves because of her lies. And for the first time, I felt like we had a real chance. As I lay in bed that night, the weight of what we were about to do settled over me. I was terrified, but I was also more certain than I'd ever been. Tomorrow, we'd take the first step. Tomorrow, we'd start to tear down the walls she'd built. And for the first time, I believed, really believed, that we might actually win. The next morning, I walked into the office with my head held high, my heart thundering in my chest. Daniel and I had stayed up late the night before, reviewing everything we had. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough a crack in her perfect image that she wouldn't be able to ignore. I'd barely settled into my desk when I felt her presence behind me. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her silence heavy with meaning. Finally, she cleared her throat. Can we talk in private? She asked, her voice as smooth as always. I swallowed hard and nodded, following her into her office. My legs felt like they might give out, but I forced myself to keep walking. This was what I'd been waiting for, the confrontation I'd known was coming. She closed the door behind us, the soft click of the latch sounding louder than it should have. She turned to face me, her expression calm, almost kind. But I knew better. I'd seen the edge beneath her smile, the claws hidden behind her gentle words. Is there something you'd like to tell me? She asked, tilting her head slightly. You've been busy lately. I forced myself to meet her gaze. I don't know what you're talking about. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Come on, Eliza. Don't insult me. I know you've been asking questions. I know you've been recording conversations. My stomach dropped. She knew, or at least she suspected enough to confront me. I'm not sure what you're implying, I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. I've just been doing my job. She leaned back against her desk, her fingers drumming lightly on the wood. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were different. I thought you were smart enough to understand how things work around here. I stayed silent, my hands clenched at my sides. But now she continued, her tone softening. You're making things difficult. And I don't think you understand what that could mean for you. There it was. The threat wrapped in velvet and delivered with a smile. I'm not afraid of you, I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Oh, I think you are. Or at least you should be. She pushed away from the desk and took a step closer, her eyes locked on mine. You're playing a dangerous game, Eliza. One you can't win. And when it all falls apart, because it will, you'll be the one left standing in the ashes. I felt my hands trembling, but I didn't back down. You don't get to decide what happens to me. Not anymore. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe even respect. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that calm, measured smile. Suit yourself, she said lightly, turning back to her desk. But don't say I didn't warn you. She dismissed me with a wave of her hand, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. I walked out of her office, my legs shaky, but my mind clear. She'd shown me exactly who she was, and now there was no turning back. I met Daniel in the stairwell later that day, the one place we knew she wouldn't think to look for us. She knows, I said, my voice low. She confronted me this morning. Daniel's face went pale. What did she say? That I should be careful, I said. That I'm playing a game I can't win. Daniel swore under his breath. She's bluffing. She has to be. If she really had anything, she'd use it by now. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the way she'd looked at me, like she already knew how this would end. We don't have a choice, I said quietly. We have to finish what we started. We spent the rest of the day finalizing our plan. We decided to bring everything to HR, every recording, every document, every carefully collected piece of evidence. It was a risk, but it was the only way to make sure she couldn't bury the truth. As I sat at my desk sorting through the last of the files, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. I thought about Lena, about Brad and Mark, and everyone else she'd used and discarded. I thought about how close I'd come to letting her silence me. No more. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling as the minutes crawled by. I kept hearing her voice in my head, that calm, almost gentle threat. But instead of fear, I felt something else, determination. She'd tried to break me, but all she'd done was make me stronger. I woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I dressed carefully, choosing the plainest outfit I owned, as if to make myself invisible. But I felt anything but invisible. When I walked into the office, I could feel her watching me. She was in the break room laughing softly with someone, but her eyes flicked to me as I passed by. I met her gaze and didn't look away. Today was the day. At lunch, Daniel and I slipped away to HR, the folder clutched tight in my hands. The manager, Kara, listened in silence as we laid it all out. Her face was unreadable, but I could see the way her fingers tightened around her pen, the slight furrow in her brow. When we finished, she looked up at us, her expression grave. "This is serious," she said quietly. "I'll need to review all of this. But if what you're saying is true, it is," I said firmly. "We wouldn't be here if it wasn't." She nodded slowly. "Then, I promise you, we'll get to the bottom of it." As we left the office, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time, it felt like the weight wasn't mine alone to carry. She'd given me her last warning, and I'd chosen to ignore it. The hours after our meeting with HR felt like waiting for a storm to hit. My hands trembled as I tried to focus on my work, the words on the screen blurring together. But even through the haze of nerves, there was a new steadiness to my resolve. She'd tried to warn me to shut me up, but instead of backing down, I'd spoken the truth. And now there was no going back. I caught Daniel's eye across the office. He gave me a small nod, a silent show of solidarity. We were in this together. No matter what came next, we wouldn't face it alone. Later that afternoon, Kara from HR called us back in. My heart pounded as I walked into her office, the weight of everything we'd shared hanging heavy in the air. She looked serious, her face pale and pinched. "I've reviewed the recordings and documents," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "There's no denying it, what you've brought to me is very serious." My throat tightened. "So what happens now?" Kara took a deep breath. "We have procedures we have to follow. There will be an investigation, an official one. We'll need to interview other employees, cross-check the information you've provided. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "Are you prepared for that?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her question. "Yes," I said finally. "I have to be." Daniel nodded beside me. "We're not going to stop now." Kara gave a small smile. "Good, because you're going to need to be strong for what's coming." We left the office together, our steps light, even though the air still crackled with tension. The truth was out. The first crack in her armor had been made, and now there was no way to hide it. When I got back to my desk, she was standing there. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were cold and hard. "I heard you've been busy," she said, her voice soft and even. I didn't flinch. "I have." Her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You think you've won, don't you? That you've finally turned everyone against me?" I met her gaze, feeling the calm in my chest settle like a stone. "No," I said. "I'm not trying to turn anyone against you. I'm just telling the truth." She laughed, a low, mocking sound. "The truth," she repeated. "You think anyone cares about the truth? People believe what they want to believe. And I know how to make them believe me." "Not this time," I said quietly. "Not anymore." For a moment, I thought she might explode, might finally let the mask slip completely. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You think you're safe because you have your little recordings. But the truth doesn't matter if no one is willing to hear it. And when this blows up, and it will, you'll be the one left standing in the rubble." I held her gaze. "We'll see." She straightened up, her expression as smooth as ever. "You're a fool, Eliza. And you're going to learn that the hard way." As she walked away, I felt a chill run down my spine. But I also felt a surge of something else, defiance. She wasn't going to scare me anymore. The rest of the day passed in a blur. People in the office could sense that something was shifting, though they didn't know exactly what. Conversations stopped when I walked by, and there were more than a few curious glances cast my way. But I didn't care. I had nothing left to hide. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, my phone in front of me. I scrolled through the recordings again, listening to her voice, to the silky lies she'd wrapped around everyone. Each word was a reminder of why I couldn't stop, why I couldn't let her win. I thought of all the times I'd doubted myself, all the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I was crazy. And I realized something she'd thrived on, that doubt. On the way, it made me small and silent. But I wasn't small anymore. The next morning, HR sent out an email announcing an official investigation into allegations of misconduct. They didn't name her directly, but everyone knew. The air in the office was electric, a mix of fear and anticipation. She pretended nothing had changed, but I could see the way her hands shook ever so slightly when she thought no one was looking. I saw the tightness in her jaw, the forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing the real her, not the calm, collected woman she pretended to be, but the scared, desperate person beneath the mask. Lena found me at my desk, her eyes wide. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Are they really investigating her?" I nodded. "They are." She let out a shaky breath. "I didn't think it was possible. I thought she was untouchable." "Everyone did," I said quietly. "But no one is." As the day wore on, I watched the way people shifted around her, some still loyal, still caught in her web, but others starting to pull away. The whispers grew louder, the questions sharper. She could feel it, I knew, the walls closing in around her. By the time the sun set, I was exhausted. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, a bone-deep relief that came from finally telling the truth. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how she would try to twist this back on me. But I did know this: she couldn't make me doubt myself again. When I left the office that evening, the air felt crisp and clean, like a storm had finally broken. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. She'd tried to warn me, tried to make me believe that no one would ever listen. But now everyone knew. The next day felt different, the office heavy with an energy I couldn't name. People still spoke in hushed tones, careful to avoid my gaze or hers, but the atmosphere had shifted. No longer was she the unquestioned queen of the room. Now she was a question mark, a shadow of uncertainty. Everyone was too nervous to name out loud. She still tried, though. She walked through the halls like nothing had changed, her smile as bright as ever, her voice calm and measured. But I saw it in the tightness of her shoulders, the slight tremble in her hands, when she thought no one was watching. The investigation had begun in earnest. HR had set up interviews, quiet conversations behind closed doors, that left people rattled and pale-faced when they emerged. Every time someone was called in, they'd glance around nervously like they were afraid to be seen. I'd been called in that morning, sitting across from Kara in a small conference room. She was kind, her voice gentle, but I could see the weight of what she was doing pressing down on her. "We need to be thorough," she said, her pen poised above a legal pad. "I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything you know, every detail, even the ones that seem unimportant." I told her everything. My voice shook at first, but as I spoke, it steadied. I laid out every recording, every conversation, every time she'd twisted the truth and tried to make me doubt myself. Kara listened in silence, her pen scratching across the paper as she took notes. When I finished, she closed her notebook and gave me a small, reassuring smile. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "I know this hasn't been easy." I nodded, feeling a knot in my chest loosen just a little. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Back at my desk, I felt her watching me. I turned to find her standing there, her expression carefully blank. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. "It must feel good," she said softly, "thinking you finally turned everyone against me." I held her gaze, refusing to look away. "This isn't about turning people against you. It's about telling the truth." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned cold. "You've always been naive, Eliza," she said. "You think the truth matters, but in the end, people believe what's easiest. And it's easier to believe the person who's always been in charge." "Not anymore," I said quietly. "People are starting to see who you really are." She didn't respond. She just turned and walked away, her shoulders rigid with barely concealed anger. As the day wore on, I saw how her grip on the office was slipping. People who'd once hung on her every word now avoided her gaze. Whispers followed her wherever she went, small tentative things, but enough to show me that the tide was turning. Lena came to me during lunch, her face pale, but her eyes bright. "I spoke to HR," she said, her voice trembling with nerves. "I told them everything I knew." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You did the right thing." She nodded, her breath shuddering out in a sigh. "I was so scared. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore." "You're not alone," I said. "None of us are." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of hope. We'd all been so isolated, so afraid of speaking out. But now, one by one, we were finding our voices. But it wasn't over yet. She was still fighting, still trying to hold on to the control she'd built over so many years. And I knew she wasn't going to give it up without a fight. That afternoon, Kara called her in for her own interview. I watched as she walked into the conference room, her head held high, her expression calm. But I saw the way her hands fisted at her sides, the way her shoulders stiffened. She was scared. She just didn't want anyone to see it. When she emerged an hour later, her face was pale, her smile gone. She didn't look at anyone as she walked back to her office, shutting the door behind her, with a quiet finality. For a long moment, the office was silent. Then the whispers started again louder, this time more certain. People were starting to believe not just in the truth of what I'd said, but in their own instincts, their own doubts that they'd buried for so long. Daniel caught my eye as he walked past, giving me a small, relieved smile. "She can't hide anymore," he said quietly. "It's all coming out." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle over me like a balm. She'd tried to convince me that no one would ever believe me that I was alone. But now the whole office was starting to see her for who she really was. That evening, as I packed up my things to leave, I paused at my desk and looked around. The tension was still there, but it felt different now. Like the air had been cleared, like the lies that had once choked us all were starting to lose their power. I thought about everything that had brought me here, the fear, the doubt, the quiet, careful recordings I'd made in secret. I thought about all the times I'd wanted to give up, to walk away, and pretend none of it had ever happened. And I thought about her last warning to me that I was playing a game I couldn't win. She was wrong. As I stepped outside into the crisp evening air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was out now, and she couldn't bury it again. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain: she'd underestimated me. She'd underestimated all of us. And in the end, that was her biggest mistake. The official investigation didn't take long to gain momentum. By the end of the week, the HR office was a revolving door of interviews and whispered conversations. It felt like everyone was finally coming out of the shadows, shedding years of fear and doubt. I watched her from my desk as she moved through the office, her once unshakable confidence replaced by a tight-lipped composure. She still tried to smile, still tried to act like nothing had changed, but the damage was done, and there was no going back. Kara called me in for a final meeting late on Friday afternoon. The sun was already setting, casting a golden glow across the conference room. I sat across from her, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "We've completed the preliminary review," Kara said, her voice calm but firm. "And the evidence you provided along with the statements from your colleagues, it's enough to move forward with formal action." My chest tightened. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means she'll be suspended immediately pending further investigation," Kara said. "And it means we'll be bringing in an external investigator to ensure that everything is handled properly." I nodded slowly, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. This was what I'd fought for, what we'd all fought for. But part of me still couldn't believe it was really happening. Kara gave me a small, reassuring smile. "I know this has been difficult for you, Eliza, but I want you to know that you did the right thing." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," I whispered. When I stepped out of the conference room, the office was quiet, everyone focused on their work, or pretending to be. But as I walked back to my desk, I felt eyes on me, some curious, some supportive, some still wary. I kept my head high. It didn't take long for word to spread. By Monday morning, she was gone. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew she'd been suspended, her office sitting empty and silent. I expected to feel triumphant, but what I felt instead was a deep, quiet sadness. She'd built her world on lies and manipulation, and in the end, it had all come crashing down. I didn't pity her, but I couldn't help feeling the weight of what it meant to finally see the truth. Lena found me in the break room that morning, her eyes bright with relief. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "She's really gone." I nodded. "For now. They're still investigating, but..." Yes. Lena let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. I can't believe it. I thought she'd never be held accountable. None of us did, I said quietly. But we made it happen. Daniel joined us a moment later, his expression serious. Have you heard she's supposed to make a statement today? HR is bringing everyone together. I blinked. A statement? Yeah, he said. An apology. Or at least that's what they're calling it. I wasn't sure what to expect as we all gathered in the main conference room. The air was thick with anticipation, everyone crowded together, their voices low and cautious. Kara stood at the front of the room, her expression calm and composed. She cleared her throat and gestured toward the door. Thank you for joining us, she said. I know this has been a difficult time for everyone, but I want you all to hear directly from her. The door opened and she walked in. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and unreadable. For the first time, she looked small, vulnerable. The woman who had once ruled this place with a smile and a soft voice now looked like a shadow of herself. She stood in front of us, her shoulders rigid, her hands clasped in front of her. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Finally, she lifted her chin and began to speak. I want to acknowledge what's happened here, she said, her voice low and strained. I know that I've made mistakes, that I've hurt people, and for that, I'm sorry. The words sounded hollow, forced. But even so, hearing them felt like a crack in the dam, proof that the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping the room. I know some of you won't believe me, she said quietly. And I understand that. I've spent a long time convincing people to see only what I wanted them to see. But I can't do that anymore. A ripple of surprise went through the room. She wasn't just admitting to what she'd done, she was admitting to the way she'd done it. I don't expect forgiveness, she said finally, but I hope that in time you'll all find a way to move forward, even if I'm not part of that future. She stepped back, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Kara stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. Thank you, she said. You're dismissed for the day. We'll be in touch as the investigation continues. People began to file out, their voices low and uncertain. I stayed where I was watching her as she stood there, her shoulders slumped. For so long she'd been untouchable, now she looked like just another person who'd made a terrible mistake. As I left the room, Daniel caught up with me. How do you feel? He asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment. Lighter, I said finally. Like I can breathe again. He nodded. Me too. We walked back to our desks together, the office strangely quiet around us. The whispers were still there, but they felt different now, less fearful, more hopeful. Like everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. And I knew one thing for certain, whatever came next, I wouldn't be afraid. I'd spent too long living in her shadow, too long letting her words dictate what I could and couldn't do. But now the truth was out, and no matter what she said or did, she couldn't take that away from me. She'd tried to warn me, tried to convince me that no one would believe me. But now everyone did. The next few days felt like stepping out of a fog. The air in the office was clearer, the weight of her presence no longer pressing down on everyone's shoulders. It wasn't just that she was gone, it was that the truth had finally been spoken aloud. For the first time in what felt like forever, people looked each other in the eye without flinching. There was still tension, of course, still the uncertainty of what would come next. But there was also a quiet relief, like we'd all been holding our breath for too long, and finally let it out. I focused on my work, letting the steady rhythm of emails and spreadsheets ground me. But even as I settled back into my routine, I felt different, stronger, like I'd finally reclaimed something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. Lena stopped by my desk one morning, a tentative smile on her face. I just wanted to say, thank you, she said softly, for standing up, for not letting her silence you. I smiled back. You don't have to thank me, I said. We all did this together. She nodded, her eyes bright. I know, but you were the first. You showed us we didn't have to be afraid. As she walked away, I felt a swell of something warm in my chest. For so long I'd thought I was alone in this fight, but now I saw that the strength I'd found in myself had helped others find theirs too. Daniel and I met in the break room that afternoon, both of us quiet for a moment as we sipped our coffee. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said finally, his voice low. I nodded. "It does. Like we're free in a way." He gave a small, rueful smile. "I still can't believe how long it took me to see it. How long I let myself believe her lies." "You're not the only one," I said gently. "We all wanted to believe the best in her. That's what she counted on." He looked at me, his eyes serious. "But not anymore." "No," I said firmly. "Not anymore." Later that day, Kara called me into her office. She looked tired, but relieved, her usual calm demeanor softened by the events of the past week. "I wanted to let you know that the external investigation is underway," she said. "They'll be talking to everyone, going through all the records. It's going to take time, but we're moving forward." I nodded, my hands clasped in my lap. "Thank you for believing me," I said quietly. "For listening." Kara's expression softened. "You didn't give me much choice, Eliza," she said with a small smile. "You brought the truth to light. I'm just glad I was here to see it." I left her office feeling lighter, the knot in my chest slowly unraveling. For so long I'd carried the fear that no one would ever hear me, that I'd be trapped in her shadow forever. But now I knew better. When I got home that night, I stood in front of the mirror studying my reflection. My face looked the same, tired maybe, but resolute. But in my eyes, I saw something new, the quiet strength of someone who had faced the darkness and refused to be swallowed by it. I thought back to the first day she'd threatened me, the way her words had felt like a cage around my throat. And I realized how much I'd changed since then. I wasn't that scared, uncertain woman anymore. I'd found my voice. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me again. The next morning, the office was quieter than usual. People moved through the halls with a new sense of purpose, their conversations more thoughtful, their laughter less forced. It felt like we were all learning how to breathe again. Lena and I had lunch together in the small break room, sharing sandwiches and quiet conversation. "It feels like everything's changing," she said softly, her eyes distant. "Like we're rebuilding piece by piece." I nodded. "That's what happens when the truth comes out," I said. "Things break apart, but it means we can build something better in the pieces." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I like that," she said. "Something better." That afternoon, I gathered my courage and stopped by the empty office that had once been hers. The door was closed, but the nameplate had already been removed. For a moment, I stood there, letting the silence wash over me. I thought about everything that room had represented: fear, manipulation, the lies she'd spun so easily. And I realized that while her presence had shaped so much of my time here, it didn't define me. It didn't define any of us. I turned and walked away, feeling a quiet sense of closure. As I settled back at my desk, Daniel stopped by, a hopeful smile on his face. "You know," he said, "I think we're going to be okay." I looked at him, at the new calm in his expression, and felt that hope stir in my own chest. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think so too." The day passed slowly, the office quiet but peaceful. As the sun set outside, painting the walls with a warm glow, I realized that we were all starting to heal in our own ways. The scars would be there, of course, some wounds run deeper than others. But healing had to start somewhere, and it had started here with a single voice refusing to be silenced. When I left the office that evening, I took one last look around, taking in the quiet hum of computers, the soft murmur of voices. It felt different now, lighter, more honest. A place that could be safe again, where we didn't have to be afraid of speaking the truth. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt a small, satisfied smile tug at the corners of my lips. I'd survived the storm. I'd faced the darkness and found my way through. And now, as the last of the sun's rays faded into the night, I felt ready for whatever came next. because this wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. The next morning, the office was filled with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Sunlight spilled through the windows, glinting off the glass and metal, and for the first time in so long, it felt like the light was reaching every corner. No more shadows. No more secrets. I moved through the halls with a new sense of purpose, each step a quiet declaration that I wasn't the same woman who'd walked these halls months ago. I was stronger now, not because I'd faced her and won, but because I'd found my own voice along the way. Lena caught my eye as I passed her desk, and she smiled an open, genuine smile that said more than words ever could. Daniel waved from across the room, his expression easy and unguarded. We'd all been changed by what happened here. We'd all chosen to step into the light, even when it was easier to stay hidden. I paused by the break room, glancing at the empty space where she used to stand, spinning her careful lies. It was strange how quiet it felt without her, but in that quiet, there was possibility, a chance for us to rebuild, to create something honest and real. As I gathered my things at the end of the day, I felt a quiet pride in the weight of my steps. Each footfall was a testament to what we'd overcome. The truth had once seemed so fragile, so easily twisted by someone who knew how to wield it like a weapon. But in the end, the truth had been stronger than her lies. Outside, the evening air was cool and sweet, the world bathed in the golden light of a setting sun. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, letting the last of the tension drain from my shoulders. She'd told me no one would believe me, but now everyone knew. And that knowledge was a freedom I hadn't even realized I was fighting for. It was the freedom to speak, to be heard, to take up space in a world that had tried to keep me small. I'd found that voice, and I wasn't going to let it be silenced ever again. As I walked to my car, I thought about all the others out there, people who'd been told their stories didn't matter, their voices didn't count. And I knew what I wanted to say to them: you are not alone. You deserve to be heard. So if you're out there, if you're reading this, watching this, know this: your voice is powerful. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Stand up, speak out, because the truth, it always finds a way to be heard. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories of hope, strength, and the quiet power of speaking your truth. Together, we're stronger.